Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Up for Growth 2021 Virtual Summit for Housing Changemakers. I'm Jason Jordan. I'm the Director of Policy and Public Affairs for the American Planning Association, and this is the Local Policy Practices and Solutions to Land Use and Zoning session. Really glad to have you here. Before I introduce our panelists and get us started, I'd like to give a brief overview of Up for Growth. It's an organization I'm pleased to work with and one that APA is deeply engaged with because it works to create a world where housing is always an opportunity and never an obstacle. Up for Growth is a national cross-sector member network committed to solving the housing shortage and the affordability crisis through research and policy. They provide timely research and insights on housing policy at the local, state, and federal levels, as well as networking opportunities at events like this. Membership is open to organizations of all sizes, and if you'd like to learn more, you can use the link at the bottom of this slide, and I certainly encourage you to do so and get involved. I'm really excited for today's discussion. I'm also happy that APA is partnering with Up for Growth to rebroadcast today's session as part of next week's APA Policy and Advocacy Conference. It's a terrific partnership that we're happy to be a part of. I'm also very pleased to be joined by three distinguished guests who are going to walk us through what's happening at the local level to address zoning reform and our housing crisis. I'm going to give a brief introduction to all three of them, and then we'll start out by hearing a little bit about the context and the work that they're doing in each of their cities, and then we'll have some discussion. Sam Diaz is the Senior Policy Advisor to Portland, Oregon Mayor Ted Wheeler. He also worked with the Thousand Friends of Oregon organization and was an advisor to California Governor Brown. We have Lauren Hartnett with us. She's the policy director for Austin, Texas Mayor Pro Tem and District 1 Council Member Natasha Harper Madison. And we have Daniel Mesplay, who's the Senior Manager for Zoning and Development in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He previously served in local government roles in New Rochelle and Port Chester, New York. I'm real excited to hear from all three of them. While we know that zoning reform and housing challenges are issues that are animating the conversation and the debate here in Washington, where I am, and in state legislatures around the country, we also know that it really is at the local level where these problems find practical solutions and where navigating the politics of this issue are sometimes the trickiest. So let's start in Portland and move east. So Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you to tell us a little bit about what's happening in Portland and the work that you're pursuing. So Sam, take it away.
All right. Thanks so much, Jason. And thanks to Mike and Gabby and the team at Up for Growth for the privilege to join the panel. It's great to be with Lauren and Daniel on this important conversation. So I'm gonna try my best to situate us a little bit in Portland, Oregon. Welcome to the beautiful Pacific Northwest for this presentation. And what we'll go ahead and do is, and Gabby, if you can go to the next slide, please. Just really wanted to start with the culture. I think it's really important to acknowledge the incredible community organizing and the civic engagement that makes the city vibrant. Hundreds of folks email and call in to City Hall on these types of legislative land use proposals. And it's because of this hard work and the social infrastructure, the networks here, that we're really able to I would say, question and change the status quo for housing affordability and availability. And because of that, I'll then dive into a little bit of Portland City Code and some of the legislative proposals that you may have read about. I'm happy to talk to folks offline about. We're going to dive a little deep into Title 33, our city code, where we streamline, where we make a few edits, so to speak. And then really the permit counter. And I had the pleasure to be the liaison to the Bureau of Development Services, who is one of our lead bureaus for implementing these legislative proposals. And as a more lay person, right, folks would call in and be like, we read the Portland Tribune or we read the Oregonian about residential infill project. So like, what does that mean for me? And I think that's a big opportunity for local government to communicate the changes and how they affect each and every parcel in the specific proposal. So Gabby, if you could go to the next one. So I really want to underscore Portland's problem-solving attitude, and I see some Portland local leaders here on the Zoom, so I want to give a shout out to them. And really, these are just a few snapshots of many. Obviously, pre-pandemic, I need to say that, right? Pre-pandemic, of walking tours, rolling tours, happy hours at our local businesses. And then actually in that bottom left corner, you see one of our advocates passing out pizza after a multiple hour long city council session where they were testifying why these legislative proposals are so important and why city council needs to make these changes. So it's a culture that embraces these types of, quote unquote, wonky conversations. There's a lot of boot camps, and the bench is built every single day. And so that, I think, then fosters the opportunity, particularly, it shifts the political window for us to be able to even have work sessions and legislative agenda items on the docket, which I'll talk about just now. So Gabby, we can shift to the legislative docket. And it has been a very busy year and a half. And I wanted to start out with fall 2019. We had the bicycle parking code update. That was an overhaul. It had been since 1997 that the city took a hard look at the requirements for developers, particularly developers who are building major apartment buildings, businesses, and saying, where are people going to put their bike, right? We want people want to ride their bikes. We want people to ride their bikes. Let's make sure that we have safe and secure storage in these buildings, not just in the foyer, but also in unit to make that happen. So that was a multiple year effort. Again, you see in the middle picture, the Planning and Sustainability Commission diving deep into the details of legislative proposals like that. That passed. City Council unanimously adopted that change in fall of 2019, and it became effective in March of the next year. So we're already starting to see applications and Bureau of Development Services process new developments with that kind of update. Better Housing by Design, which took about 4 years of organizing, of research, of public meetings to get to. That streamlines our multi-dwelling apartment buildings, particularly with a focus on affordable housing. So that way we can see more units. We say homes, but I'll say units because I think the space is, you all have a planning background, are very well versed on it, and so that streamlines and enables people to add more units to their blueprint. I want to acknowledge, after we had a busy fall with those two proposals, and then the city shut down, as I think all cities did, right? And we had to adapt to the city and make sure the mayor was very keen on keeping business moving forward. The pandemic was actually underscored the importance of housing affordability and availability. And we needed to make sure that the jobs associated, that the capital associated with these projects were not lost in our city. So we adapted, added an extra beat for public engagement, added virtual options. We're a big fan of Map App. If you're a local government and you're trying to figure out what platform to use, highly suggest Map App. We have a Smart Cities PDX team that's the back end for that, which we invested in and built out during the pandemic. And so then once we had that set, had a webinar explaining that to constituents, kind of what the adjustments are, we were able to move our legislative docket forward during the pandemic virtually, and started with expanding opportunities through affordable housing. I'm not going to, I have an additional slide for that because it's one of the main examples I want to talk about. We then took on Central City 2035 readoption, which increases the height among many other environmental considerations like bird safe glass or like setbacks or like there needs to be a design element that incorporates the river. But it really increases the height, which what we heard, one of the barriers to building in the core of Portland is these projects are not, are in the red. We're not able to make them work in when we go to apply for financing. And so we need more room. We need more ability to make these buildings work. And so that was one of the main ways that the city supported include infill, equitable infill in that. We also have a law here in Portland on the books on inclusionary housing. And so when you see those size of buildings in, and they have, over 20 apartment units, that triggers inclusionary housing. So we actually generate permanent affordable housing units or funding because of that type of development. We then have residential infill project. I have a slide for that. And then local transportation infrastructure charge, which we'll talk about as part of the residential infill project. And then lastly, the expiration date extension project. This was actually added at the beginning of the pandemic, and our city bureaus went to work, spent long hours to make sure that applications that were in the queue that they received more time and more ability to have appointments with our bureau staff and figure out, hey, the city's taken some time to adapt. We want you to have some time to adapt. So we added that project. All of these have now been adopted by city council into law and are either in effect or going to be in effect by the end of the calendar year. So we can go to the next one, Gabby. So the one legislative proposal I wanted to dive deep into, because I think it may be an opportunity for other cities throughout the nation, but we examined, and this was made possible by a grant from Metro, our regional government, and a partnership between our Bureau of Planning and Sustainability and about 19 different sites. They're conditional use, and you can imagine that they're schools, they're faith-based institutions, they may be community centers, and maybe they're not in use all the time. Maybe there's extra land there, but they're different than the surrounding residential neighborhood that they're situated within. But that land is a great opportunity for us to put some housing in key neighborhoods and connected neighborhoods. And so we were able to, over 3 years, research what potential code changes could go with it, what specific sites would be really good case studies that could kind of build the case for a sweeping legislative change. And so that is kind of the zoom in that we were able to do with this proposal. So now the city allows community organizations, again, schools. So Portland Public Schools has been a partner of this project. A lot of faith-based institutions, again, getting to the culture. I was in meetings, meeting after meeting, and I say that with joy, with pastors and ministers and reverends who all were like, our congregation wants to help with the housing crisis. How do we help? We have empty parking lots. We have land we don't use all the time. Please let us build. Let us connect with affordable housing developers so we can use this land and help with the crisis. So that pressure and that clarity of a problem statement enabled us to really move this through council and be the first one on the legislative docket during the pandemic. I'll go to the next example. Oh, Gabby, sorry, next slide. Oh, is there one more? Is there one on?
Sorry, Sam, there's not one more. Did you know what you wanted to say?
I will just talk about the residential infill project. Folks may have heard about it. I have to make a plug for, oh, there it is. Okay, great. So residential infill project and our local transportation infrastructure charge, LTIC. So this one you may have seen in the news. It took 5 years of organizing, of research, of public meetings. We actually went through a mayoral administration change, a few city council members changed over. And so it took a lot of time to just make sure that this ball kept moving forward. So overall, at the time, I should take a step back, and there was previous mayor Charlie Hales who convened a stakeholder advisory committee that was really focusing on the amount of calls that were coming in about demolitions, and then what was coming out of those demolitions of older homes, smaller homes, were these big homes in our constituents' eyes that were taking up the whole lot. And that was a great concern to a lot of folks for very different reasons. And so the scale of houses was one focus area that the Stakeholder Advisory Committee was tasked to focus on. The other one was narrow lots. In Portland, we have a lot of skinny lots that are just before the residential infill project passed, neighborhoods, developers had a big question mark over them, and the city did too, because we just didn't know what was allowed on those. And the third was alternative housing options. So this was in the wake of changing demographics and a lot of conversation about, well, family sizes are getting smaller, people are aging. We have a greater share in our population of aging Portlanders. What are they going to do, particularly with fixed incomes? We want to make sure that this is an age-friendly city so that everyone, all ages and abilities, can live here, right? So those were the three main focus areas, all under the umbrella, I would argue, of housing affordability and availability. That emerged into this residential infill project and allowing different kinds of homes and more homes on parcels in the majority of our residential zoning. And before that, right, the city had banned the construction of a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex. And so it was really, right, you see this in the flyer in the top left, we're re-legalizing, we're taking this back and saying, wait a second, what are the effects of this ban? And isn't it making it harder to have more housing, less expensive housing, and different kinds of housing? And that was the conversation that was really generating in neighborhood associations and business districts. And so many people came out to testify in support. And I'm not saying it was all, like, it was unanimous in our constituents, right? There were a lot of concerns that were coming up and bubbling up in the conversation. There's also, I think, we still have some folks that are resistant to change in their neighborhood. And so getting folks comfortable with this balanced and gentle, phased-in approach to building more housing because we need it was part of the conversation every single day. In those conversations, as we are grappling with what does the final proposal look like, how do we make sure that this is going to be durable, right? That this lasts beyond Mayor Ted Wheeler. One of the issues that we heard was, well, what about the infrastructure impacts? If you're gonna allow thousands of homes to be built throughout the city, what about the sidewalk, the sewer, the water? What about all those things that we already know is aging? And so out of those conversations, we identified a solution with the local transportation infrastructure charge. And that program allows developers to pay into a citywide pot. It's a fixed amount, depending, there's a tiered system, and it allows developers to pay the share into the infrastructure for the city. The city then has formulas, and I would say more often than not, Portlanders are pretty used to how our Bureau of Transportation or our Water Bureau or Environmental Services identifies project needs. So we allowed, so we said, okay, well, if we allowed this type of new housing and different housing in our city, then we should be able to allow them to pay into this local transportation infrastructure charge. And that will help defray some of the costs and actually bring more necessary revenue to the city to maintain and build this infrastructure. I want to take a step back, and I'm going to put my 1,000 Friends hat on. I'm going to say this infill, having more homes in a neighborhood and looking at the budget balance sheet of the city, it makes it actually more fiscally responsible and possible to maintain this type of infrastructure rather than building something out on completely new land where you aren't sharing the cost amongst a bunch of homes, a bunch of neighbors. So it actually helps our city budget become more resilient to the infrastructure costs down the line. And then the last slide, and sorry, I'll wrap up. I'm trying to time myself. Okay, so what just happened is kind of the phase that we're in right now. And quite frankly, right, I think we're all, what is still happening? What is going on? Implementation. And I really want to acknowledge the incredible work of our Bureau of Development Services and our permitting staff in water, environmental services, Bureau of Transportation. They do incredible work. And I don't know how many times that we have had the mayor go and thank them, because after a day of getting yelled at, right, they need that morale boost. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure that our staff who are on the front lines, that we're able to recruit and retain them, that they feel appreciated, that they're seen, and that we make sure that we can, part of that is, I think the ice cream social, making sure electeds are dropping in on their staff meetings to thank them, making sure their budget is whole. But also we needed to upgrade the equipment and technology for the Bureau. And so that was a priority for the mayor. And so we did a complete software overhaul. Rebecca Esau, the director over there, just an incredible leader, was able to overhaul that and actually update that and get the permits into the system. So you see a screenshot there. And you also start seeing new services like virtual inspections so that people can do that remotely. So a lot of modernization is happening in the Bureau to support these legislative proposals. So that way we do see what Portlanders need to see built in their neighborhood and to address really this housing crisis. Another objective, cut down the time and cost, and then communicate what the changes mean. Lots of lunch and learns, lots of webinars. And so that is kind of the phase of implementation that we are currently in. If you visit the Bureau of Development Services, you'll see all that information, all the one-pagers, to make sure that we raise awareness for all Portlanders and communicate the opportunity that was unlocked because of the incredible community organizing. And with that, I will turn it over back to you.
Thanks, Sam. That's terrific. Really fascinating stuff, and congratulations on all the progress in the city. It's really amazing. Let's move to Texas and hear what's happening in Austin. Lauren, take it away.
Thank you, Jason. Wow. Austin's been working on attempting to update our land development code for the past 10 years. So I hope I can maintain Sam's level of optimism here. But I will also start with setting the scene. So Austin is one of the most rapidly growing cities in the country currently. And with that, we are also, I believe we recently made a #1 list of housing price increases. So our housing costs have gone up dramatically. And it seemed to expedite during the pandemic. For some reason, Austin was an incredibly desirable place for businesses and individuals to move during the COVID pandemic. And existing residents are definitely feeling the pressure with our limited housing stock. Like I mentioned at the beginning, Austin's been our land development code that's currently in place was passed back in 1985, so it's very outdated. And we got so close to passing an updated draft at the beginning of 2020, but then it got stuck in court due to a lawsuit. So we've had to pivot. But that said, we have come up with a couple things that we can do, a lot of it piecemeal. But one of the programs I wanted to talk about was Affordability Unlocked. It's a program that council passed in 2019 that allows an increase in entitlements. You can eliminate parking, you can increase your height, reduce your setbacks, eliminate compatibility if you provide a significant amount of affordable housing. I believe 50% of the units have to be affordable. At 80% MFI, we say MFI in Austin instead of AMI. And if you're renting, if it's for sale, and then 50% MFI if it is for rent. Texas, we're limited in what we can do as far as affordable housing. We can't require the construction of affordable housing. We can't have that requirement. Inclusionary zoning, there we go. But we can incentivize it. So by having this program, we've been able to incentivize the development of affordable housing, but also increase our housing capacity through that. So an added benefit of that. Also in 2020, November 2020, the city, we passed I guess the initiative was to fund it, but we passed the funding for a massive public infrastructure project called Project Connect, where we are completely overhauling, and not even overhauling really, but creating a public infrastructure system. That includes light rail and bus, rapid bus lines, multi-billion-dollar project. But in order to maintain and support that investment, and also to get federal funding that we desperately need to build it out, that will require increasing our density along the transit lines. So our office, I'm really proud of this, earlier in the year, we passed an initiative for an equitable transit-oriented development policy plan, and to help guide the creation or the planning, there we go, the planning of the increase of the density along these lines, and to ensure that we have equitable access to high quality transit throughout the city, and have affordable housing opportunities to have that access, and to ensure that it is that it's transparent, and that there's significant community involvement, that there's community buy-in from the beginning. I think that's one challenge. I think anyone who works in the housing space, change is hard, and it can be quite an emotional topic. But I find that if you start engaging the community early and often, and bring them along for the ride, per se, and get the buy-in and that they're part of the project, that it tends to go a bit smoother. So let's see here. I feel like I should have had a slide deck. I would say those are our two biggest initiatives that we passed in Austin recently that hopefully will have a significant impact in our housing capacity. Saying a lot. But like I mentioned, there's a couple piecemeal things that we're working on, whether that's trying to streamline our fees. I think that's something that doesn't get discussed a lot in the land use conversation, but the whole permitting process and having a Byzantine permitting process really has a significant negative impact on housing affordability and being able to put the units that are needed out on. So we have some initiatives working on that. Revamping our density bonuses, again, with being able to incentivize the construction of affordable housing. And hopefully sometime soon we will get through the lawsuit and we'll be able to update our land development code. But yeah.
Great. Thanks, Lauren. Fascinating to hear what's happening in Austin, and certainly in a few minutes, maybe we'll dig into more about what's going on with the lawsuit and the challenges there. Let me turn it over to Daniel. What's happening in Cambridge?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, and great to be alongside Lauren and Sam too, and hear about all the great things they're doing. I'll be really quick because I really want to dig into the discussion a little bit. So just for folks on the meeting who maybe aren't familiar with Cambridge that much, we're part of Metro Boston, so we're right across the Charles River from Boston. We're a city of about 116,000 people, density about 18,000 people per square mile, which puts us right up there with some of the kind of densest populated cities in the country. We're right around where San Francisco is. We're home to MIT, Harvard, and Lesley University, so we kind of have a strong institutional base to our economy. We're also on the MBTA transit system, so we have 5 MBTA red line stops in Cambridge, which sort of lends itself to a nodes and clusters kind of development pattern rather than a bona fide sort of downtown. Most of our density is sort of clustered around our transit stops. So we have a lot of housing types and scales, from single family homes all the way up to 40, 50-story skyscrapers. We've got a big sort of commercial and life science tax base. In terms of some of the biggest issues that are facing Cambridge, I'm a planner through APA, and Jason, I know you are too. So I really have to emphasize that zoning is sort of the implementation tool for planning, and Cambridge has a strong history of thoughtful planning for its neighborhoods. So in 2019, we adopted the Envision Cambridge comprehensive plan, which sort of laid out all of the big challenges that are currently facing Cambridge. So areas like declining affordability, which Sam and Lauren have both kind of touched on, climate resilience, rising inequity, changing urban form, so balancing sort of the preservation of our historic squares with the sort of pressure to develop and increase our housing production, and then our shifting sort of local economy. So we have a very strong life science and biotech base, but that has been in transition for several decades from what used to be kind of a strong manufacturing base. So my role at the city of Cambridge is to basically shepherd zoning petitions and development projects through the public review process. So whether that's planning board or city council. Just some quick sort of housing facts. We've got about 55,000 residential units. 15% of those 55,000 residential units are subject to some sort of long-term deed restricted affordability. With that said, our real estate market is just kind of bonkers, and housing is extremely expensive. So the median sales price for a condo in Cambridge is just north of $800,000. For a single family home, it's $1.6 million, which puts it out of reach for most people. Some challenges to building affordable housing in Cambridge. There's really high land costs. There's competition from market rate developers to build commercial development. There's the sort of appeal of the discretionary approval. So when the planning board grants a special permit for a new development project, there is an appeal period that exists, and that can certainly be a drag on new development. And then, as we all know, zoning limitations on affordable housing, that's something that's really been a key focus for us. In terms of the zoning tools that Cambridge has sort of employed to address a lot of the affordable housing issues, so we have what we call incentive zoning, which is money that is required to be paid by new non-residential developments. So at $20 per square foot, that non-residential development pays a cash contribution, which then goes to building residential development in the city. We also have inclusionary housing, like I think Sam mentioned. Ours is a 20% set aside of net leasable area. We have a statewide process in Massachusetts for building affordable housing, where affordable housing developments have a pathway to get zoning relief through the Board of Zoning Appeals. But again, that requires sort of a discretionary approval. We have a local affordable housing trust that doles out a significant financial support for new affordable housing projects within the city. And then lastly, kind of the big thing for us is last year, the city adopted the affordable housing overlay zoning process. And what the affordable housing overlay zoning district does, it's a citywide overlay district that incentivizes affordable housing development by giving some extra density, some extra height to affordable housing projects, and also gives them sort of a by right approval process where no sort of discretionary vote at the planning board is required for them to move to a building permit. So I'll stop there and looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks. Really an interesting overview of all three cities. Let me sort of start the discussion a little bit by asking you to reflect a little bit on the politics of housing in your communities, and maybe even more specifically, sort of the coalition building that you've seen go on. We know from looking around the country that housing and particularly zoning reform, code changes generate unusual political bedfellows at times, and there can be concerns raised across the ideological spectrum about some of these changes. So I'm just sort of curious, you sort of all talked about sort of the spectrum of where you are on promoting reform and boosting housing supply. Sort of walk us through a little bit, kind of what it's been like navigating those politics, and any ideas about sort of who came out and who has been sort of the kind of groups spearheading this reform conversation. Maybe Sam, we'll start with you and then go around. I'm curious to hear from all three of you.
Sure. So I can say I'll use the two slides as examples in our legislative docket. Expanding opportunities for affordable housing generated a lot of support from Portland Public Schools, from Portland Neighbors Welcome, which is a grassroots group. I see at least one member on the teams who take it on their own to educate themselves, educate other community members on these really complex legislative land use changes. They advocate to Planning and Sustainability Commission, influence the proposal there, and then work with. The nice thing about Portland is advocates work with each other, so they're talking to one another. So City Hall doesn't have to convene and broker some type of compromise, right? Advocates are talking to their own, which puts bureaucrats in a really, I think, advantageous and beautiful position, because we listen to the final results of community coalitions, conversations, and see the final amendment list that comes out of it. And then we work through that there. And like I said, there was a land use and housing coalition with faith-based institutions in our city. And, I think politically, if you have that kind of coalition, more often than not, right, it's going to go through. And you have the landowners, right? They're the landholders, those institutions who want to build permanent affordable housing on their land. And they're saying your code is a barrier to us helping your problem. I mean, I can't think of anything more compelling than that. So that really, that was why we chose that as our first legislative item on the docket once we were virtual, because we knew the support was there, very little to minimal opposition on that type of change. And it unlocked a lot of housing construction potential. Like Daniel was saying, the land cost is one of the biggest barriers to developing, especially permanent affordable housing. So to have people prioritize that, I mean, that was a great bang for buck. The residential infill project, that was a broad and diverse based coalition. I mentioned the stakeholder advisory committee. I would say that was the majority of folks on that committee agreed with the recommendations, but there were still a few that did not agree with the project as a whole. But the supporters went to go fundraise, apply for grants to local foundations, partnered with affordable housing developers, partnered with anti-displacement advocates, and developers, and a mix of infill developers. So you have these local developers here in Portland who are trusted messengers. And then we have Home Builders Association too. And they're saying, yeah, we're in it. We're supportive. We'll throw behind it. And one entity that I personally, I know that we shouldn't do favorites, but AARP Oregon is just so incredible in terms of connecting age-friendly communities with land use zoning changes. They have so many. If you haven't looked at their website, I would recommend go checking out AARP Oregon, because they have primers on how to build an ADU, what an age-friendly community looks like. They have templates for zoning in those booklets. I mean, it's just incredible work that they have done to bring their membership along the journey. So that's a little bit of a scan, and really curious to hear Lauren and Daniel's answers.
Yeah, the interesting thing in Austin is that when you have pro-housing initiatives on the ballot, or even, for example, my boss, she ran on a very pro-housing platform with, advocating for compact, connected development and creation of complete communities. They win in a landslide. But then when you get to City Hall, the very strong, prominent voices that you hear the most are in opposition to those things. And so I would say that there is a need in Austin for us to work on coalition building, that we need to, have a good old-fashioned door knocking campaign and conversations and just basic outreach to build a coalition that has new and longtime residents, old, young, and diverse. I think that's also something that's lacking in our housing advocacy groups is diversity. So we need that is something I think that needs improvement here in Austin. But I would say that the politics of housing are contentious, to say the least. And it can be a struggle, but I'm optimistic that there's some changes that we can make, and if the election ballots are reflective of the true feelings of the city, I don't think it's going to be impossible to get there, but I think some work needs to be done to make sure that those voices are heard here at City Hall, and not just those in opposition.
And just for me, so I guess I'm a little different from Lauren and Sam, because I'm just, from the nature of my work, I'm somewhat detached from the sort of background and grassroots politics that inform the sort of origination of a lot of these kind of zoning changes and zoning petitions. I will say, though, that in Cambridge, I don't think anyone sort of disagrees with the premise that housing affordability remains sort of one of the city's most critical issues that we're facing. The challenge comes from when a lot of these sort of high-level issues start to intersect, and that's where zoning policy for me gets really interesting, because you've got interest in open space and climate resilience, and then what happens when new housing production might kind of have to come face to face with some of those. Another key challenge, I think, for Cambridge is that the real estate market largely supports development of commercial uses like lab space and biotech space, because the costs of construction and the rents that you'll get from residential development just don't really pencil out the same way that commercial development does. So the city has had to get sort of creative in ways of ensuring that new commercial development is balanced with new residential development in the city. And I want to give a shout out to one of my mentors, Joe Minicozzi, from a firm called Urban 3 out of Asheville, North Carolina. He's got a mantra that is do the math. And he has sort of applied that to looking at the impact of new development on a municipality's bottom line. And in Cambridge, we've kind of extended some of that mantra to zoning policy. So in 2019, the city council passed a policy order that basically said for any owner-led or petitioner-led rezoning of at least 50,000 square feet, an economic analysis be conducted that examines the change in project value from the rezoning and then compares that to the value of the community benefits that are offered. And that's been really, really crucial in terms of the city council being able to actually look at the numbers and ensure that what the city is going to be getting back in terms of community benefits matches up with what a developer or a landowner would get from the new commercial development. So just from 2 recent rezonings in Cambridge, that's led to almost $500 million of community benefits for things like new housing, new affordable housing, and that's been really crucial.
Well, Daniel, your reference there, invoking math, sort of leads me to one of the first audience questions that came in, specifically for Sam, but maybe the other two of you want to weigh in on this as well, just from the perspective of ordinances in your own or initiatives in your own communities. The question, which you can maybe see in the chat if you're looking at it, is related to the transportation infrastructure charge, Sam. It's about the balance of the cost burden on new versus existing housing, and whether or not the increase of the charge caused some of the projects not to pencil out. Walk us through the math, so to speak, and how you address that.
Sure. So I will say, let me just see. I'm going to copy paste into the chat the LTIC homepage and calculating the charge. So this is, varies by the parcel, but there are, when we think about missing middle housing, it'll most likely be at the lower end here, right? R 2.5, R5, R10, so somewhere around $30,000 to $60,000. It was interesting because when the conversation first came up about the infrastructure concerns, staff generated a proposal that was more than this. So city staff had created a formula that said, oh, here's, a couple $100,000 that a developer would need to pay in order to build a triplex or fourplex. And that I think hit the bumper, so to speak, of the Home Builders Association. Some of the pro housing advocates were like, wait, what are you doing? Like, this is quote unquote a poison pill for this proposal. And so we held a meeting in City Hall with City Bureau staff, with advocates, local developers, and said, okay, where could we reach our goal? Because I think we can all agree we need to have funding for this necessary infrastructure as we're allowing developers to build more and different kinds of housing. Everyone agreed on that premise. And so we were able to work towards that solution, which ultimately ended up being this tiered approach, the local transportation infrastructure charge. And so I think it was more of a political bumper of, can we keep the coalition still in support of the proposal, and make sure that we're going to actually reach the units projected in the proposal. So that was how we facilitated that conversation. And I think advice is maybe start ambitious and understand that public process is going to give you a final better product.
Any other comments from Lauren or Daniel on sort of the economic case here? Where Daniel, you talked about the fiscal impact analysis driving things in Cambridge, but any other economic thoughts about this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I'll say is that we've got a housing division we're really fortunate to have that's up to speed on sort of all the costs that are related to new housing production. For some of our fees that we levy, like the incentive zoning payment, for instance, a lot of those fees are born out of planning. For instance, we've had a linkage study done for incentive zoning that really analyzed what sort of cost was fair, what could be borne from new development without accidentally killing a project or causing it to not pencil out. And then one thing that we've done is actually attach it to common indices like the consumer price index for annual increases, so that we don't have to kind of go back to the well every 10 years and then kind of re-engineer and refigure out all the math associated with it. And that's been really important.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to talk about street impact fees or economics and land use in general?
No, yeah, impact fees. Go there. Let's
all right. Well, so we're still working on implementing our street impact fees. But when it came to council, one thing our office was really concerned about was the fiscal impact to projects, whether it would result in them not being able to pencil out or to have increased costs passed to the consumer. We're really concerned about the impact to affordability for housing. So one thing that we did, because it was going to pass, I don't think we were going to win that fight, but so one thing that we did was request that our development services department really look at their fee structure to see if we can offset the increase of costs with from the street impact fees by reducing or eliminating other fees that are currently levied on development. We have a lot of fees in Austin. I think now we have 6 different tree survey fees. So maybe we can not have 6, and we'll be able to offset the cost from the street impact fees. So that is something that we look at quite a bit.
So there's a question that came in, Lauren, mainly for you, but everyone can weigh in, about the public process experience around affordable triplex legalization, and specifically how the political space opened up for that kind of versus the more typical experience of opposition. I
thought I saw that question pop in. And it was interesting because we haven't done an affordable triplex initiative here in Austin. It sounds cool though. I would love to have affordable triplexes at all.
Well, Sam, you in Portland, you guys have moved in that direction. Let's talk a little bit about public process in general, and sort of how that's kind of part of the overall process of moving reform forward.
Mm-hmm. Was that for me or Sam?
Either anyone who wants to take it. I mean, I know that this issue of public engagement and public process and its connection to what is in the realm of the possible is a big part of kind of what local governments are confronted with. So what do you see? What's working? What are problems? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, to me, when land use in and of itself is a very esoteric policy area. It's very technical, and it can so it can be difficult to communicate. And so when we're discussing big changes that are land use related, we like to approach it from a more high level, big picture way. What are the goals? What would the community like to see here? What type of businesses, housing, do you want to maintain affordability, keep it very high level, and not parse through, all of the nitty gritty details, because there's lots of different ways to get there. And usually what the community wants would result in much more density than what they would generally one, if you do it through a more, okay, we're going to upzone to this, from single family to, small density, or mid-rise multifamily density. So I think keep it high level, big picture, and keep it goal oriented has been successful for us.
Okay. Any other comments on public engagement tips?
I think in addition to, I'd say Oregon has a statewide land use planning program that has public notice requirement and meeting laws that are, by the book. And I think, having worked in California sets a high bar. I think if you're taking on, and once you enter City Hall, our form of government is commission form of government. So we don't have a strong mayor system. So each vote, right, you have to get 3 votes of the 5. And generally, right, the mayor wants to be collaborative. He does not like proposals that do not have the 5 votes, because it's a signal that may not be a durable proposal, right? There may be some sort of pendulum that swings back after the administration, serves the folks. So I would just say for ours is just a bit unique, and so there's a lot more internal meetings that need to happen. So when advocates are meeting with folks on the proposal, we made sure that staff in different council offices who were point on the policy were also there. So we were getting firsthand information at the same time, processing at the same time, and making sure that we were bringing all of the council offices along the journey, even if they had concerns, or we knew that they were, against the proposal to begin with. So I would just say that there were a lot of council office briefings, and there was actually a regularly occurring meeting between the lead bureau, our Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and folks who were interested in legislative proposals for housing affordability and availability. And folks got really used to saying like, oh, I want to see the sign-up sheet, even virtually. They met, what I loved was like they met the council clerk and got to know the council clerk's team. Once you get really comfortable with the building, virtual or in person, it starts to you start to carry momentum, and you just have a lot more relationships that are trying to get this through. So I just say, you can never over communicate. You can never have too many strategy meetings. People have a lot of questions about like simple mechanics of the process.
Great. So we're coming to the top of the hour. I know this conversation could go on a lot longer, but I do want to hold to our time. But I want to give each of you a sort of lightning round, 15 seconds to kind of tell us what's next. Like, what's the next big housing issue on the horizon in your community? Where are you going to be putting your planning and political energy next? Go for it, Lauren.
Okay, yeah. Implementing the ETOD policy, ensuring that we increase density to support Project Connect.
Great.
Yeah. For us, we've been really focused on the affordable housing overlay zoning. So now that's in place, we're going to be we've got our first sort of pipeline of projects that are going to be moving through the planning board process. So we're going to be really focused on getting those through.
Great.
I would actually say, and this is what I have loved about working with Up for Growth, is I would say the city is currently putting together its state and federal legislative agenda. It's a public item that will come to council, and I would love to understand, I think with the Biden administration, we have such amazing opportunity to bring back the partnership between the EPA, HUD, and the Department of Transportation. I mean, what a dream partnership that had, and the amount of grants that incentivized smart growth and housing affordability and availability at the local level. So I would just love to prioritize I think coalition building across cities, across the nation, to figure out how do we unlock funding. Maybe we start to see a bit more legislation at the federal level, so it's not so whack-a-mole here.
I would love to partner with you on that, Sam, by the way.
Sounds good,
Yeah.
Lauren.
That's a great point and an excellent commercial for a lot of sessions that are going to play out in the coming days and weeks, because I know that there's going to be some opportunities to talk about the very interesting housing conversations that are unfolding in Washington. So look forward to working with you all. We'll wrap up now. Thanks to Sam, Lauren, Daniel. It was really great to have you. Really great to hear about the exciting things that are going on in your communities. And thanks to everybody for joining us. Look forward to continuing this conversation, and certainly working on some of that coalition building to build the partnerships that we need to make reform happen. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Take care.